and welcome back to the Health One podcast. I have a very special guest on today, also known as the Fertility Detective. We've got Jessica Bourke. Welcome, Jessica, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Orla. Thrilled to be here. I
am very excited for this topic today because, it is a whole podcast series in itself. It really is, and it affects so many women. Even if you are maybe not necessarily, kids are not destined to be in your path, it's a discussion for women anyways. And when you go to the doctor, you may be dismissed or told basically if you've got hormonal imbalances, and you may just be pushed down the line until you have kids. And it's like, well, what about my quality of life now? What about if I don't want to talk about future planning? It's this kind of pressure that a lot of women face. And obviously I have my PCOS clients, so my own journey as well, I would have struggled with that earlier on, when the diagnosis of you are going on the pill, don't want to get pregnant now, which we'll talk about, and that's all we can do for you right now. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you to become the fertility detective and where you are today?
Yes, absolutely. And you touched on so many great points there. I'm looking forward to diving into all of that. My brain was going 90. So yes, but first, quick intro. So obviously my name is Jessica Bourke, aka the Fertility Detective. I have been working exclusively in the field of reproductive health for the last 17 years, long time. And it all started actually way back when I was studying law, having left school, bright-eyed, 17 years old, thinking, yes, going to take over the world, and got very, very sick in my first year. With what they said was kind of like glandular fever, but they were never fully sure with the screening they did. And at that time, I was either a law or medicine girl. I was going to be choosing one or the other. Basically went with law because they said, my mother said quicker degree, so you may as well start with that. What did I know at that age?
Irish advice.
Classic Irish mother, yeah. So I got very sick in that first year. And at that time, obviously, like I said, I'd been torn between the two, and I was still looking at doing medicine. But the experience that I went through when I was sick changed my mind. And it was quite kind of cataclysmic, at the time, because it totally threw out everything that I thought I knew. Because ultimately what was happening was all the doctors I saw said there was nothing they could do for me, that there was no way they could help me with my energy. And now imagine this, your first year in college, and I'm lying on a couch for the best part of 4 months. Zero energy, chronic fatigue, lost a ton of weight. I was like Skeletor, really, really bad impact on my health. And yet the doctor's suggestions were drink some Complan and rest. And there was no Complan is it's an old drink. Bear in mind, I'm a little bit older than you. It was a drink that was given to people who were convalescing. It was vile. It was kind of, this weird gloopy smoothie thing with, vitamins and minerals in it. So not pleasant. And I couldn't understand that there was no other advice given.
Yeah.
I didn't, I couldn't comprehend that this was it, that it was just go do those things. We can't help you unless we're giving you medication. Of course, they tried antibiotics that didn't work because it was viral. And it just left me, like I said, lying on the couch thinking about the future and thinking, well, first off, what have I learned at a tender young age? Your health matters, because if you haven't got your health, there's not much else you can be doing. Yeah. And second thing I thought was, so if medicine can't help me, what am I meant to be doing here? What do I study? And it was through that phase that I started actually doing my own research about nutrition and understanding how the body works and biochemistry and all that stuff. And then spoke to some doctor friends in the family, and they said, look, doesn't seem like you actually want to be a surgeon or anything like that. So I would suggest that you keep going with your course of action to try to figure out prophylactics or preventative methods to support your health. So long story short, went through all of that and ended up then studying acupuncture while completing my law degree. Everyone thought I was nuts. Then went on to study nutrition, did postgraduate training in Six People's Hospital, Shanghai, did training for fertility with Zeta West. And very quickly, even though at the very start of my practice in 2005, I was actually turning people away for fertility because I felt it's too much responsibility. It was obviously fate, because it just very quickly spiraled. I treated one person and then their friend and their friend's friend, and it just went from there, basically.
Amazing. What a story. Very similar to me, where I was kind of toying with the idea of going into medicine, but it was like very early on that I realized, okay, well, I was never actually given something that led me to the root cause. It was always like this medication that didn't work for me. Obviously, some medication does work for some people, but the types of conditions that I have, IBS and PCOS, like that with that chronic fatigue, there's no explanation, there's nothing we can do. It's just deal with it. Like your quality of life is so greatly affected. I realized, okay, finishing my science degree, and the plan was to go and do medicine. Was that actually aligned with what I wanted to do? I could see the limitations in it as well. But that's absolutely amazing with acupuncture. This is something, I love what you said actually before we went into acupuncture about how you were overwhelmed by it. So this is a topic, infertility, that like a lot of people, it's like this mythical thing that it's just like we it's the luck of the draw. You may get pregnant, you may not get pregnant. And I even remember when I first started working with clients very early on, one of my clients was doing IVF. She had a miscarriage, and that was obviously very emotionally distressing for her. And I didn't feel like there was anything I could do about it, because I didn't understand that nutrition and lifestyle plays a role in that. We'll get into IVF as well, but I also didn't realize how amazing acupuncture is. Would you mind telling our listeners just about I suppose, maybe what acupuncture is and how you have found that beneficial for supporting hormones?
Well, it's an interesting one, because I wouldn't be probably the typical person that you would expect doing acupuncture, if that makes sense. So coming from, that kind of traditional model of, law, medicine, accounting, those were kind of the three careers, wasn't expected to go into acupuncture. What actually led me to study it was, as you might expect for someone with that background, I had experienced it while sick with glandular fever. I had improved dramatically, and I couldn't explain it. So that was why I actually studied it, was because here was something that, didn't come through the traditional model at all, even though it's obviously been around for thousands of years. And I thought, well, there has to be something to this. Even though I can't understand it, I'm going to give it a go. So that's what I did. Now, if we're going to explain what it actually is, I don't talk in terms of chi and, telling you about kidney insufficiency, because that's Swahili to people. That makes no sense. And actually, just being the kind of person that I am, I looked into the research in this, and apparently back in the 16th century, a Dutch fellow came over from China and he had mistranslated a text. And so this idea of talking about the meridians and energy and everything, you're really talking about the nervous system and neurotransmitters. But of course, back then they didn't know that. Okay, so it's not actually as separate from the traditional model as people might like to think it is. Right. And so how it is impacting the body, I mean, they've actually proven with MRI scans of the brain. They've done live MRI scans of the brain where someone is having, because you have to account for placebo effect, someone is having control group acupuncture, which is where there was a needle that would retract into the shaft. So it's actually, the needle is still touching the surface of the skin. So it probably actually feels more uncomfortable than having the needle actually inserted versus the other group. And they were able to show different activity in the brain, including switching off pain centers of the brain, which is extraordinary, because we've kind of reached a point now where I suppose allopathic or Western medicine has caught up with acupuncture, in the sense that we can now actually investigate why and how it's working, where for hundreds, thousands of years, they were just doing it over there and they didn't know why it was working. And so it affects the neurotransmitters, it affects the endocrine system as a whole. I will say this, acupuncture can only work with what it's got, if that makes sense. So that's why actually through my studies and training, when I was treating people and then went on to do nutrition, it was because the fact I could see the people would plateau. They would get a certain point of relief, but then they just weren't getting any better. And it was because you have to address the biochemistry in a more fundamental way as well. So as I'll often say, acupuncture isn't going to fix a vitamin D deficiency, but it is absolutely amazing in terms of the mechanics, the things I saw in terms of improving people's back pain, elbow, anything musculoskeletal, and obviously kind of mechanical as well. So boosting blood flow to the uterus, it's quite incredible for that too.
Amazing. I love what you said about how this is what I'm figuring out here in Bali, that there's a lot of what people would consider woo-woo. There definitely is some sort of explanation with it, but because it seems so woo-woo, there's no focus or no research being done on it. People are getting these amazing breakthroughs. Maybe some are placebo, maybe some are actually working with their nervous system, helping them feel safer, helping them release, helping them de-stress. And all of that does have an impact on their hormones. So I love how, even though it's considered like alternative, it is definitely being brought into the forefront, and it's really bringing everything around to holistic health at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So even I was like yourself, I was very analytical and very much like we shouldn't really be looking at all of these things because they're so woo woo. Like people are
Yeah.
brainwashed by this stuff and there's no research, but obviously it's
Mm-hmm.
important to understand that we don't have research for everything at the minute, and there are medical biases, there are research just based on males as well, so we need to kind of catch up with that too. But yeah, I love how you said that we have that plateau, that you can
Mm-hmm.
get certain things, you can get to a certain stage maybe with one modality over the other. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really about bringing everything on board, really focusing on your mental health, on your nutrition, on your lifestyle, on supplements. And I think people can get very bogged down by one or the other. Like myself as well, I would have very much gone down the road of like, okay, I need to take this supplement for this, and this supplement's going to fix me with this, not understanding that maybe I wouldn't need to take tryptophan if I actually just got out of shitty relationships.
Well said.
But it's really about understanding how it's all connected at the end of the day. And I love how you're starting to work with the medical industry and trying to bring it all together instead of it being, okay, you've gone to the doctor doesn't help you, you're kind of left to figure it out on your own devices as well. I suppose that does bring us on to fertility then. And I suppose, given my own experience, like I mentioned, so I would have been diagnosed with PCOS and told you have to go on the pill to manage your PCOS. And I said, okay, well, what's my chances of getting pregnant then if I have this illness, if I've got cysts on my ovaries? And it was basically like, yeah, you probably won't be able to get pregnant. And it's like, okay, well, when are we going to talk about that issue? And it's like, well, just go on the pill now, and when you want to get pregnant, come back to me. So at the age of 23, I was like, well, I don't want to get pregnant now, but like that's something I'm really stressed over, and I didn't even know if I wanted to have kids. But then I was like, wait, hang on, you can't tell me I can't have kids. It's this battle that for me obviously wasn't something that I felt affected me at that age. And it was just because I didn't want to have kids. It doesn't mean I need to look at nutrition, doesn't mean I need to look at my hormones. When people miss the kind of lead up to fertility is what's really important. Like you shouldn't decide that, okay, today I'm going to get pregnant, I'm going to come off the pill, and I'm going to aim for now a 6-month plan, and I'll be pregnant and I'll have my baby by Christmas and blah, 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 blah. It's really to understand the maturation phase of the egg, to really have the best quality, to really have the less stress, and to enjoy the journey, I would say. I think there's so much pressure on women, and I think there's these time stamps as well, that it's like you're approaching your 30s and your egg reserves are running out as well. I want to talk about AMH levels. This is something that you talk about quite a lot, and it's very much something that my clients would get done by their doctors. Not that I suggested the test, but that they would they do it for whatever reason. Can you talk about maybe why people would get it, when it's helpful, when it's not really helpful?
Absolutely. So just before I dive into the AMH, because there's just a couple of things you touched on there that I feel is so important to articulate, that, you know, the amount of people I have actually seen, and last year in particular, I remember there were a number of clients I had who were in their 20s and had exactly the same situation, being told, go on the pill. And there's just two things to anyone listening I just want to get across. The idea that, first of all, that the pill fixes anything to do with your PCOS is totally ludicrous. Secondly, that it's only worthwhile giving the time of day or attention to someone about their PCOS if they plan on having children. Also ridiculous. This is something that is a metabolic syndrome that affects your whole life, so many aspects of your health. It is not just reproductive. So I just felt that was necessary to say.
Yes.
So yeah, anyone who's listening who's been fobbed off, please make sure that you fight your case, because this could really impact your future. Whether your plan is to have children or isn't, it is still an important thing to get on top of. So with that being said, AMH. So AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone. It's a hormone secreted by the antral follicles, the ones kind of at the front of the ovaries. And when it came to the fore, I mean, I remember this happening because I've been at this a while. So probably, I'd say it was maybe about 12 years ago, give or take, that they were really starting to talk about it. And at first I gave it the benefit of the doubt. The idea is that you can test this in your blood at any time of the month or any time in the year, it doesn't matter. And that it will give you a prediction of how many eggs you have left. And I might add, at that time, though less so now because they realized they can't get away with saying it, they were very clearly saying this will tell you about the quality of your egg. So that was a big mistake that was said back then. So very quickly, the cracks started to show, because I could see that the results people were getting were variable. And, they were being told at the time, and people still are, that the AMH number that you get, it can only go down. It's only going to spiral from here. And that is categorically incorrect. I have seen people's AMH levels go up, and go up quite substantially. So it is not a case that it can only go in one direction. It also doesn't help the actual numbers and assay methods used. So I remember when it first came out and one came in saying, my AMH is 5. Does that mean I have 5 eggs left? So I really think they should explain that a bit better to people, that no, you're still talking in the thousands. But the key thing to note is that all the recent research, the meta-analysis, so that's, going through all the results of various studies and collating them, have found that the AMH reading does not dictate your likelihood of having a pregnancy continue to term. So remember, there's a difference between clinical pregnancy rates, that's just getting pregnant, but actually staying pregnant, having a healthy baby at the end of it. In terms of age, because you always hear that whether you're 30 or 40, the biggest factor is going to be your egg quality. Even for those with a lower AMH who might have been older, they were still just as likely to have a pregnancy at the end of it. So really, when you step back and look at it, all the discussion about AMH, what is it actually doing to help people? I have seen people in their 20s go to get their AMH tested. It's low for their age. So let's say their AMH is 15 or something, still perfectly fine. And they are panicking about their fertility and going for egg freezing and starting on the whole fertility treatment journey. And isn't that terribly convenient for the clinics? It's huge business. So no wonder they were very keen on that test, because it has always confused me. They're so keen on that test for the eggs, but less keen on sperm DNA frag, which I'll get into later. So with AMH, the times where it can be somewhat useful, and in the context of PCOS, this is important to state, is if your AMH level is ridiculously high, okay, so if it's very, very high, odds are you should be ruled out for PCOS, okay? It definitely means the likelihood of cystic ovaries, as to whether that's PCOS or PCO, if there's something else going on, would need to be ascertained. But it is really important to note that there is that link, that correlation between elevated AMH, and for good reason, because obviously with PCOS, we know there's more follicles, they're just immature. So needless to say, that would show up with an AMH reading. Conversely, if an AMH level was very, very low, so like 0.01, and combined with, so never viewed in isolation, combined with an antral follicle scan, so follicle tracking scan that showed, you only, normally you'd have maybe 6 to 10 follicles start to develop and one becomes the dominant. But if they're seeing, there's only maybe 2 or 3, and there just seems to be very little activity within the ovaries, then that person might be dealing with premature ovarian insufficiency, or POI. So these are times when AMH can be useful, but it is only one little part of the puzzle. It is never something that should be viewed in isolation. You shouldn't be making any big fertility decisions based on it. They should be doing full hormone panels, internal investigations. So yeah, to anybody out there who's been scaremongered by AMH, make sure they're looking at other things too.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. It's like really look at everything from all angles, which is something that you may have to advocate for. Like a couple of times I've had to write out full justifications as to why my clients would need blood tests. They're like, what does thyroid have to do with PCOS? I'm like, sorry. I'm like, huh? And
Wow.
then this brings in, I suppose, biases or discrimination based on weight, in particular with PCOS. It's like, okay, well, come back to me when you lose weight. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's a reason that they struggle to lose weight in the first place. And like you touched on as well with age, and then just because you've got PCOS or some other symptom or syndrome, maybe if you've got endometriosis and inflammation, it's just like, okay, well, there's nothing we can do for you, when there is so much that you could do. Like, you can access lower levels of inflammation, you can get a regular cycle, you can support everything holistically. You may need to investigate with your thyroid, you may need to have a look at nutrition, lifestyle, supplementation, etc., etc. And it's unfortunate, I think, because obviously we know what to say, or we know what's bullshit, we know what's actual truth or not. But unfortunately, a lot of women are, and I like what you said there, that link between the IVF clinics and how it's very convenient for them with the AMH levels. I think this is something that I struggled with at first with clients, because I was like, I know what is right and what is wrong here, but I struggle to understand where I can cross the line or not based on what doctors are saying. Because I think
Mm.
for so many years, doctors have been these people in power that basically have been trusted without any sort of no one questioning them or challenging them. And women are now starting to, amazingly so, advocate for themselves and their bodies as well. I suppose that brings us into, if we want to have a look at improving egg quality, improving your chances of conception, what would be the top tips, let's say, for people in that journey?
Great question, and I also love what you touched on there, just about. Sorry, I'll get into the egg quality, but I have to say this. You have so many things, but just what you said there about questioning the status quo, and I shared. I mean, obviously it'll be probably a few weeks ago when this airs, but I shared something to my stories last night that was about this very issue. About it was a traumatizing story written by a Guardian editor about the loss of her daughter because of a series of mistakes that had been made in the hospital. And her daughter died needlessly. This is, a 13-year-old child. And, as she very clearly stated as well, this isn't about bashing any doctors. There's loads of great ones there too. But we have to acknowledge the fact that you are absolutely within your rights to question. You are allowed to ask. And exactly what you said there about that sort of crossing the line, I'm all about that, helping people to have the information they need to advocate for themselves in these difficult situations where people are feeling vulnerable, they're feeling scared, and something's being said to them and they're second guessing it, but they don't have that voice there to communicate it. It's such an important topic. So yeah, forgive that tangent again. Let's go back to egg quality. Yeah. So yes, for egg quality at any age, right? At any age, because what's the first thing that's synonymous with when you say egg quality? A person thinks of age. So talking about egg quality, they're thinking, I'm fine because I'm 30, let's say, or I'm in trouble because I'm 40. And I think it's really important that we first of all stop and acknowledge that egg quality is not just directly correlated to age, it's directly correlated to overall health. That is absolutely key to understand. So when I've seen people, and I see this all the time, and it's a tragedy that this happens, people under 35 being told, sure, you've time. Or worse again, if they're under 30, sure, you've loads of time. I've seen people who are aged under 30 who have been trying to conceive for years. I saw a couple recently, it was 5 years they've been trying. But you're only 31, you're fine. There's loads of time. Ignoring so many factors about her overall health that, as I explained to her, could be playing into her egg quality. And as so many people are duped into thinking she was there, but hang on, but I'm young, so aren't my eggs fine? I was like, well, they could be, but based on everything you've described in your case to date, I'm not so sure. And you've a lot of inflammation going on in terms of background health conditions that could be impacting the follicular fluid surrounding those eggs and therefore playing into their quality. Conversely, on the other side of the fence, for someone 40 plus, I've seen people aged over 40 who are in the best health of their lives, much healthier than they were necessarily in their 20s or 30s. And they're being told that it's all about age, it's all about age. And those cases, so frequently I see other factors are overlooked, perhaps to do with the sperm health or something missed in the internal environment because they had the blinkers on and all they could talk about was their age. So to come back to what you were saying, the top 3 tips on what you could do for egg quality. First thing is get any chronic health condition under control. I don't care what it is. If you're dealing with Hashimoto's, if you're dealing with chronic IBS or indeed an IBD condition, whatever's going on in your background health is likely to play into your egg quality because that's just the way it works. The follicular fluid that surrounds your eggs is dictating the end quality of those eggs that are maturing for either ovulation or egg retrieval. It doesn't matter whether it's non-assisted or assisted conception. Same raw materials apply. You still need those eggs. So that follicular fluid has to nourish those eggs during that time, and it depends on multiple factors. There's pro and anti-inflammatory mediators, there's hormones, there's nutrient levels. All of that is going on, just like a little soup mix around your precious eggs. So if you step back and consider, well, what else is going on in my overall health that could be playing into this? That is going to make a big difference, particularly if you're allowing yourself that 3 to 4 months, because it is a 90 to 120 day window for one batch of eggs to come to fruition in terms of its maturation. Second thing is, of course, getting on top of diet and lifestyle. So if, you talk about health conditions where you're on different medications, that might be, of course, difficult to control, but you can still control what happens every day. And that is not about this all or nothing mentality. It's not about being puritanical or cleansing or cleaning, clean diet. I know all these terms, but it really isn't. The secret, if I was to sum up life probably in one word, it's consistency. Consistency is the secret. So I'm not interested in people who are saying, oh, but look, but I ate, acai bowls 3 times this week. I don't care about the superfood notions. Like, well, stick with just eating breakfast each morning for a month.
Yes.
Could you manage that? Do you know what I mean? Like,
So
just
common.
bring it back to the fundamentals. And it sounds easy to say, and I know it's boring, it's not sexy. I mean, ask any Olympic athlete what they're training, how did you get to this amazing level? I just did the same stuff every day for 10 years. It's true. And we have to understand that plays into fertility and our overall health as well. So if you can just focus on creating some good habits, and also as well, instead of berating yourself, I'm much more about the adding in rather than the taking away. So for example, I've had cases in the past where they sit there and they say to me, now I know you're going to tell me I have to give up the cigarettes. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk. How many are you actually smoking a day? Or what else is going on in your life? And how difficult have you found it before to give up? Okay, well, if you're smoking your 5 cigarettes, why don't we actually focus on cramming in a load more veg and, slowly weaning? Because there's just no point in my telling you to stop. And then because of your cravings, having stopped smoking, you're just going to be downing 3 packets of biscuits for dinner. I mean, that's just pointless. So we have to understand that balance. And that if you can actually start to adopt that mentality. I know it takes time and should we say a lot of unlearning because of how so many of us have been taught growing up. There's a lot of, I'd say, very flawed and damaged relationships with food and, how we live our lifestyles, which I'm sure you've seen. So if you can get that under control and just start being very consistent and playing the long game. So, going back to the athlete analogy, if I told you to run a marathon tomorrow, you'd say, no, Jessica, I kind of need to train first. It's the same thing with your eggs. If you can plan ahead and go, okay, I'm going to be going for that cycle, let's say, or I'm going to start trying to conceive, at Christmas or whenever it might be, these are the few months I have to prepare, and just be nice and steady and diligent. That will really stand to you for sure. Also very important to, speak to your doctor, make sure that you have up-to-date smear, that, you're ruling out any infections or anything insidious that could be going on in the background, because that's not something that you want to be surprising you at the time then that you're actually planning to conceive. But the key takeaway is to remember that there is so much that can be done to support egg quality and to positively influence it. It is not something that is set in stone.
Yeah, oh my God, so much to touch on there. But I love your approach is so similar to mine, where it's like, get away from this all or nothing mindset and really work on the basics day in, day out. I don't think people realize how it's all connected. Like you said, with the smoking, and maybe you have other emotional stresses in your life. Maybe you are not able to regulate your nervous system. Maybe you're not eating enough food. Maybe there's so many aspects that it's all connected at the end of the day. I suppose, just talking my own experience, it's like that fear mongering that maybe got me to start to try and regulate my cycle, the fear of maybe not being able to have kids. But as I started that journey, I realized, oh my God, I actually feel better. I actually have less painful periods. I actually don't feel like a psycho the week before my period. And I don't feel like I'm having crazy blood sugar crashes and all this stuff in between. So it is really about those basics of, like what you said, not skipping your bloody breakfast. Gals, listen to me, stop skipping your breakfast. Balancing your blood sugars, trying to be more inclusive as well. That's what I operate with clients, is bring in things, don't focus on the restriction, because it can become this mundane process where you're like, my life is so miserable on the lead up to trying to conceive, when it doesn't have to be that way. You can still enjoy yourself, you can still feel happy, you can still have a bit of chocolate, you can still go out and enjoy yourself. It doesn't have to be this, you become shut off from the world and become this nun vibe where you're like, I can't actually do anything anymore because I'm so afraid as well. It is, I'm not going to say it's just as simple as that. Obviously there's so much emotions involved with it as well. And there's a lot of comparison. People will be like, I've been trying for 6 months, but my friend got pregnant last month. She literally just came off the pill and she's all good. And not comparing, obviously way easier said than done, but understanding that everyone's journey is very, very individual and unique. And I'm not going to say that perhaps I might have struggles along the way, although I have a regular cycle, and I'm back to my 28 days now. I've had a lot of life stressors getting in the way, but we're back in business. That's not to say that things will change for me along the way and I may have issues with trying to conceive. So I suppose for anyone that has had issues trying to conceive, or sorry, not issues trying to conceive, issues with miscarriage, this is something that I think I said at the start that is just this mythical kind of thing, that's like, oh God, we kind of won't talk about it, but we will talk about it. Can you shed some light maybe on some of the things that are maybe common or overlooked that people can maybe like question or take action on, rather than feeling that there's nothing that they can do?
Yes, absolutely. This is a particular passion of mine. It's why I created a program all about it, because I nearly lost my daughter 15 years ago to threatened miscarriage. And again, much like I described at the start with, health issues as a teen, the same things were said that, oh, well, there's nothing we can do to help. You just have to go home and rest and hope for the best. And I've obviously since learned a lot more now than I did back then. And I had very much made a vow to myself at that time that I was going to go through the research and figure out what's actually going on here. And there's so much. I think what you touched on there when you're talking about getting your cycles back and, improving your health, the first thing I want to say is that the most common thing that is seen after pregnancy loss is, what do they tell you? Is like, oh, well, it was probably chromosomal. Most miscarriages are chromosomal. Now, what's actually being inferred by that statement is it was egg quality. That's what we all read it as, okay? Ergo, it's your fault. It's your bad eggs. And I think we have to really change the language about what is being said, because this casual statement of, oh, it's probably chromosomal, just leaves someone feeling absolutely downtrodden, despair. They're grieving for their pregnancy loss. And now they're left feeling, oh, great. So it's all my fault. And that's just absolute nonsense. The idea, first and foremost, that embryo quality is only due to the egg and has nothing to do with this little thing called the sperm is madness. They are 50-50. They're both contributing the genetic material. Yes, it is possible. The egg is incredible. It can try to repair defects in the sperm when they first meet, but it's not to say that they can fix everything. And absolutely, I've seen many, many cases where the root cause of pregnancy loss, particularly if it's recurrent loss, that's an important thing to state. A first-time miscarriage or pregnancy loss, and now I'm specifically talking about first trimester losses. If someone has lost a pregnancy and was their first ever pregnancy, but it was at 20 weeks pregnant, that's a whole different ballgame. Yeah. But if you're talking about in the first trimester, usually between the 6 to 8 week mark, that could still include a missed miscarriage, as it's called. It's a bizarre term, but it means you'd go for a scan at 10 or 11 weeks, but the baby had actually stopped growing at the 7 week mark. So that's what we call a missed miscarriage. So if it's in the first trimester, first time loss is actually very common, like across the board. If you look at someone who's 25 or 45, and the reason for that is the laying down of the DNA strands, basically what becomes the central nervous system and the brain, that early stage development of the central nervous system is hugely complicated. And it's a miracle any of us are here, quite frankly. When you dig into the biology, it's like, wow, it's incredible. But the thing is, the body is also incredible. And if it gets it wrong once, it doesn't tend to make the same mistake twice. Okay. It doesn't repeat that. So that's why, as has been stated recently by the RCOG, so the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, this is a position statement and draft guidelines that were given last autumn, where they were talking about the fact that, well, look, maybe you should be investigating from a second miscarriage. You shouldn't have to wait until a third, because that's kind of the general thing you'll hear, is that you have to wait until you've gone through this horrific experience 3 times before we'll bother to run any tests. So the basic things that I tell people to look at, and these are things I see being overlooked all the time, your blood work. Going for full blood count and hormone panel can give you so much information. Now, we have to be clear on what exactly is included in that blood panel, because so many things are often overlooked. Yeah. So first thing to note, a standard full blood count will not include vitamin D. You need to request it. If you're told that, oh no, we don't test it, you need to just supplement, you make it clear to them that you are not an average member of the population. You are someone who's just lost your future baby. So you would like them to test it, please. Because I saw a lot of this happening over COVID. Now, I totally understand it was due to lack of lab reagent that was used for testing COVID and obviously for vitamin D. So they had to make a choice. I get that. But when you were talking about vitamin D for the general population. Oh, take your vitamin D so you don't get colds. It helps your immune system, helps hormones, it helps a million things. But when you're talking about pregnancy loss, there is a direct correlation. It is there in the research. If a person's levels are deficient, they're far more likely to suffer pregnancy loss. So why on earth wouldn't you test? Always test, don't guess, because ultimately, especially with supplementation and serum levels, you don't know how much to take unless you know what your blood levels are. It's that simple. So that's a big one that I see being overlooked. Also, other basic things within your full blood count. Yes, they should be looking at your iron, B12, folate levels. Those all have to be on point, especially because they play into that early stage of development and DNA. I mean, that's why we're told to take folic acid, folate. They're not the same thing, just to be clear. Folic acid from supplements, folate from our food, and from supplements that have been designed to have the bioavailable form. So that very much plays into risk for neural tube defects such as anencephaly. And so that's why obviously people want to be aware of it. But it's much more complicated than just that. That's not the only thing that we're looking at that stage. So your full blood count, vitamin D, thyroid panel, this should include more than just your TSH and T4. It should include your free T3 and both thyroid antibodies just to catch any signs of potential autoimmunity, such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is very often overlooked, or subclinical hypothyroidism, which is where your TSH might be okay, but you're seeing problems elsewhere. So those would be basic things. And then in the hormone levels, again, something that can be examined is your progesterone. So for someone who's literally just having that bleed is finding out that they're suffering a pregnancy loss, make sure to get your blood work done for that. Again, this was dismissed for years as no, it doesn't really play a part because it's different what's in your blood to what's in your tissues. They then discovered in research a couple of years ago, oh, actually, maybe we were wrong on that front. Turns out your serum levels do actually correlate and have a part to play in this. So if your levels are low, so anything under 60 nanomoles, if that's the assay measurement being used, it would be considered low. And these are simple things to address. And again, in Lancet research from last year, they also looked at this and said that, if we were properly screening people and looking at progesterone, there could be millions of pregnancy losses that are avoided each year. So it's very important to understand that there's lots that can actually be ruled out before you even begin to get into more invasive testing. And while we're on the subject, talking of non-invasive testing, also, assuming you're conceiving with a partner who produces sperm, make sure to get the sperm checked. They have to get the sperm DNA fragmentation test, not just a semen analysis, because that will tell you the genetic quality of the sperm.
Wow, so much information. Thank you for sharing that. That is like literally there's so much that could possibly contribute to that. And like what you said, I'm not leaving this doctor's office until I get that vitamin D. It's really just like, okay, we'll do X, Y, Z. It's important to assess whether those are the tests that you got done. I will often get my clients to get tests done, and when I actually request a copy of it, I find that they didn't get half the blood tests done that I requested, because maybe they don't routinely do them, or maybe just some other bullshit excuse, basically. And it is important that you check it. It is unfortunate. You shouldn't have to check. If something you requested something, you should be able to get it done. But that's unfortunate. It's not always the case, but like I do have some clients, I don't want to be doctor bashed on this podcast today. Very tempting to, but I do have some clients that have amazing doctors, and they do bring them from start to finish with all their options, explain to them that they need to go and get further nutrition advice, maybe have a look at supplements, etc., etc. But unfortunately, there is a lot of situations where you do need to stand up for yourself. You do need to advocate, and you do need to, I won't say do your own research. That's obviously something, take that lightly, but listen to information like this podcast and go to trusted sources to understand what it is exactly that you need to have a look at from a full spectrum, let's say, of tests, and seeing what can contribute to it as well. You mentioned there about IVF. So let's say someone has ruled out hormonal issues, maybe has tried the nutrition, the supplements, everything like that, and they are actually a good solid case for IVF or assisted fertility. Can you talk us through a little bit about that? So I know I mentioned at the start that I wasn't aware that nutrition played a role in that and lifestyle played a role in that to support that process. But can you tell us a little bit about that for anyone that may be needing that at the moment?
Sure, absolutely. So IVF just stands for in vitro fertilization as opposed to in vivo, which is conceiving non-assisted. So in vitro means that they're placing your precious eggs into a petri dish with the sperm. And you might also have come across the term ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection. And that is when they actually would choose a sperm to inject into the egg. That is more commonly used when they consider that there are stronger sperm issues going on, fewer count and motility, that they don't feel they can actually fertilize the egg themselves. So the whole process of IVF, I won't delve too deeply into the protocols and what you might actually go through on that front, because we would be here all day. But suffice to say that it is a process, okay? It is definitely a process, and it is not one that begins on the day that you start your stimulation medications. Again, you probably picked that up as the theme of our chat today, that it is about the preparation, because I've received so many emails, messages from people over the years saying, Jessica, so I'm just starting stims, that's the short term for stimulation. I'm just starting my meds, and what can I do for my egg quality? And my honest answer is, well, I can help you with your lining thickness if that's a problem for this cycle, but the ship has sailed for the eggs. I'm afraid that was 3 months ago. So it would be remiss of me to say to you that we can hugely influence the quality of your eggs in that time frame. So the first thing to know with IVF is take that time frame, set that date on the calendar and work up to it. And that is, again, assuming partner conceiving with sperm, both partners. So the sperm quality is just as important as the egg quality. This isn't a case of, and in fact, as I've often said to people over the years, talking about their sperm health, it's like, well, you have the easier job, short-term pain for long-term gain. Once your partner is pregnant, you're off the hook. So I don't want to hear any moaning about stuff that you might need to change to improve your sperm, because you can celebrate and go to the pub after the pregnancy has been announced, or indeed past the 12-week mark. So yes, it is very important to understand that it is a team effort. It is not just one person or the other. And then very important to ascertain that everything is okay with the internal environment. What you were saying there, for someone, if they've done everything, taken all the supplements, nutrition, and they're still not getting pregnant, what's missing? And very often, I'm sorry to say this because it's something that should have been ruled out by a person's doctor in advance or their clinic, they haven't done sufficient internal investigations. So remember, there's 3 criteria for any pregnancy: egg, sperm, internal environment. And often they haven't checked that the tubes are open. If the tubes aren't open, the egg and sperm can't meet. So there are a number of different investigations, HSG, HICOSI, CIS-scan, they're all variations in the same theme, which is to run contrast medium through the tubes and see that it spills out into the abdominal cavity. Sounds scary, I know, but actually the ovary and fallopian tube on each side are not attached. There is a gap that the egg has to jump across. So that is why they need to check the tubes are open. If someone hasn't had that done, they should not go for IVF until that has been ascertained, unless there's some other medical reason or why they need to go for IVF. But checking the internal environment is key, because you don't want to put all your time, your energy, finances, your emotional health, physical health into something like this if it is not the right decision for you at that particular time. And critically, if it isn't going to be likely to give you a successful outcome. So that's why all of the preparation in advance is so important. And yes, to what you were saying, there's a ton of research showing, of course, that diet and lifestyle play into the outcome of IVF. And why? Because like I was saying, the raw materials are the same. The egg and the sperm don't change just because you're taking meds. The medication gets you to produce more eggs coming to the front of the follicle or of the ovary so that they can retrieve them. And you hope that most of them are mature. But again, what's playing into servicing those eggs? Everything that's going on in the few months beforehand. So that's why it is so important to play the long game if you are leading up to IVF.
Yes, absolutely. I love that so much. And as well, it's important to know that you're playing the long game for your overall health as well. It doesn't have to be this thing of okay, well, maybe I just won't bother for a while until I'm actually ready to have kids. It's you can actually help so much of your system and feel more energized for life, etc. But just with the raw materials, I suppose, for egg quality, there's a couple of supplements like CoQ10 and different things that you can do. I think supplements is a tricky one. Some people are so heavily reliant on supplements that they think supplements are going to do everything for them, and then they don't address everything else in their life, such as stress, overtraining, etc. Whereas some people are the complete opposite, and they're like, supplements are a waste of money, I don't want to take them. Can you shed some light on maybe the important ones or the ones that people need to take rather than wasting their money on too many at once. I think sometimes that's what can happen.
Yes. Well, the first thing I'd say is we go back to talking about that follicular fluid, like that very delicate interplay of nutrients in that soup around the eggs. If you imagine free radicals, so if we're talking about what damages cells in our body, free radicals are unstable molecules that will attack and cause this domino effect essentially throughout our cells, and that's essentially what causes aging. And so if you imagine that happening around your precious eggs, if the free radicals are a fire and you're taking antioxidant supplements, expensive supplements to put out that fire, you don't want to simultaneously be throwing briquettes onto the fire. So that's the description I would use to explain that you could spend all the money in the world on all these supplements. But if you're doing that in the hope that it'll cancel out, your big nights out that you're having, or maybe the fact that you just don't like fruit and veg and can't find ways to include them in your diet at all, and you're living on food that is probably not ideal, then it's just not going to help you. And I've seen that a lot where people are trying to overcompensate, shall we say, with supplements. And again, like I said, it's not sexy. It's more boring to have to focus on the fundamentals, but they are fundamentals for a reason. Yeah. So that's really key. But let's say someone is doing their best. They've got all their high quality protein and fats and carbs and all the antioxidants from their diet that they can fit in, and they want to look at external things to use. Yes, there's a lot of research that has been done on CoQ10, and that is known by different names. So that's ubiquinone, but there's also ubiquinol, which is the reduced form, which is more easily absorbed by the body. So it just means that if you're taking ubiquinone, you normally have to take a higher dosage in terms of absorption. The reason why this is so important is because it affects the mitochondria of our cells. And mitochondria is the energy producing powerhouse of any cell in the body. And the egg is actually the largest cell. So it's vitally important. And there's all the research that is happening currently that's looking at how do we elongate fertility? Why is it that the ovaries as an organ age quicker than the rest of our body does, essentially? And a lot of that is going back to focusing on mitochondria and what's happening within the cell itself. So that is why dosing of CoQ10 or ubiquinol is so popular. And by and large, for most people, although this would never be prescriptive, it would be considered very safe. But again, it's not the only thing to be looking at. So a lot of people are surprised when I'm talking about supporting egg quality that I don't just list off sort of generic fertility supplements or fertility multis. In fact, nothing I recommend is a fertility in the title. And it's because you have to take a step back, and going to what we were talking about earlier, background health conditions. If I see someone who's trying to improve their egg quality, who has very pronounced gut issues, then we're going to be looking at the gut. Because if that's not functioning, you can't absorb the nutrients from your food or indeed from supplements. And, the whole thing, the whole house of cards just comes crashing down, because the gut is fundamental to everything. So that would be probably focusing maybe on digestive enzymes, or maybe looking at probiotics if they felt that was needed, depending on their individual case. There'd be loads of different stages to the gut health that we could look at. And part of gut health is obviously liver function as well. So again, this comes to looking at blood work too, and breaking down, well, does anyone have problems with their liver enzymes? Is there anything going on there that may need to be looked at? So it's not as simple as just, take your ubiquinone or ubiquinol, take your CoQ, take a multi and some fish oils, and off you go into the sunset. If that were going to be effective for everyone would have got the results that they wanted by now. So yeah, it is very key to note that. Other nutrients, again, in the research that have been shown to support the body as a whole and therefore support egg quality would be NAC, or N-acetylcysteine. It's a precursor to the production. We have two hugely important antioxidants that the liver produces. So you have glutathione S peroxidase and superoxide dismutase, big words, but basically NAC is a precursor to the formation of the former antioxidant, and hugely important for longevity. They've actually measured that our levels of output of those antioxidants will play into the length of our life, and therefore obviously into egg quality and prolonging the ovarian function as well. So there's a lot that can be looked at there. Vitamin D has also been shown to increase AMH levels. So that's another really interesting one that people often aren't aware of. And fish oils, Or if you are more plant-based, then algae-derived EPA and DHA is hugely important for the external lipid layer of the egg, because again, it's a cell with a fat layer, and you want to make sure that there can be intracellular exchange, that old osmosis thing from biology, of nutrients, and to support the cell that's developing and maturing before ovulation. So there's a lot there, I know, to take in, and I wish I could make it simpler, just say take these top 3 supplements and you'll be fine. But it would be doing a disservice if I didn't say that what's going on in your background health is also just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I struggle to have like a general program as such, and have like everything I do is very personalized and individualized, because context is so important for your health. Context is so important for nutrition. Like, you can't have good and bad foods. You can't just say a one size fits all with taking supplements if you're not addressing everything else holistically. I'm laughing so much about the biology lessons when you said the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I was like, that's all I can remember from college and biology in school.
Right there with you.
But yeah, it can be overwhelming, I suppose, if you're hearing lots of different information. But there are obviously those basic ones that you mentioned, and then you may have to look a bit more personalized for yourself. So like, if you don't have a regulated cycle, you need to have a look at maybe additional supplements for that. So inositol has been a great one that has helped women regulate their cycles, and then obviously with PCOS, that can really help with ovulation and a lot of different things with balancing blood sugars and stuff like that. So yeah, so you may have to have a look at multiple supplements. You may not. You may be an individual that just has, I won't say everything under control, but has a lot of doesn't have to consider a lot of other health factors that maybe the likes of anyone with PCOS would have as well. But yeah, we have talked about so much. I'm trying to think if there's any last thing that I want to chat about. Yeah, there's so much that we could still keep going, but I won't keep you.
That happens with every podcast I do. People go, Jesus Christ, we could be here all day. I'm like, I know. That's why I'm never bored.
I know, but it's so, I suppose it's so interesting to talk about this stuff all day, because it is connected to your whole health at the end of the day. There's so much, like, see how much information we were able to speak about in this podcast. And if you can just take 3 things from this podcast that can really help implement and help you on your journey with conception, fertility, even just improving your life and your hormones and balancing your hormones. And it helps remove the shame, I suppose, from it, because there's a lot of shame with women's conditions, miscarriages, everything, that they feel when they go to the doctor. They're the person that maybe they can talk to, and they're kind of shut down or dismissed. Like what you mentioned, unfortunately, there is that rule that doctors still follow, that until it's your 3rd miscarriage, we're not really going to help you. But at the end of the day, you can find out more information. There is so much information available on podcasts, on YouTube, on Instagram. Obviously, take some of it with a pinch of salt if it's going to be this naturopath that isn't necessarily following evidence-based stuff, and she's kind of like, okay, detox your yoni and this, that, and the other, and it's like, okay, how does this actually help you? But yeah, it's about really understanding what's relevant to you, trying things and opening up conversations, maybe seeking alternative support from a nutritionist, from a life coach, from a naturopath, and really seeing how you can approach your health holistically, being honest with yourself as well. Are you in a toxic work environment? A lot of my clients will still hold on to like that worth, I suppose, they attach to their job. And it's like, I suppose with women, there is this pressure that you need to either be a mother or a working person. It's like, why can't we do both? And we can't do both. We may just need to learn some boundaries along the way. But it's about understanding where your priorities are at that moment in time and what's really important to you, and not feeling any shame for that if you want to take a period of your life where you're kind of taking a step back. And yeah, bringing in, I suppose, that community element is really, really important. Opening up to people around you and joining any groups and stuff like that will help with your journey as well. But yeah, do you have any last things that you want to chat about?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the things you were saying there. First of all, when you mentioned just about shame and, the silence culture that surrounds anything to do with fertility, it is a massive problem. There's a statistic that I would often quote that sometimes shocks people, which is that, we all know someone who's gone through breast cancer, most people would. And the stats for that are worldwide, about 2.1 million people will suffer with breast cancer this year. Comparatively, if you look at fertility and miscarriage, you're talking about at least 50 million miscarriages and 186 million individuals with fertility struggles.
Wow.
Like, that's insane. You know, the odds of it happening are way, way higher. And yet we know far fewer people because of all the taboo that still surrounds this. You know, this goes back to religion and stigma and individual cultures. You know, I've seen all sorts. And it's really important that we have these types of discussions. Thank goodness for the internet over the last 20 years has changed everything, because people aren't suffering alone. They're realizing that they do actually have others out there going through the same thing as themselves. And that's absolutely critical. On your toughest days, that is often what I've seen get people through it. So don't be afraid to reach out. There's always somebody there who should be willing to help you. It's so important.
Yeah, and I just want to briefly mention, I suppose, what's really important is, because it's so common, we shouldn't have this continuation of this generational chat, nosiness, whatever it is. When are you going to get pregnant? Are you planning now? You know, you never really know what someone is going through, whether they are struggling to conceive, whether they've had a few miscarriages, whether they don't really plan on having kids in the first place. It isn't anyone's business at the end of the day, and we need to be cognizant of that before we just drop it in a conversation. And yeah, just wanted to make sure that was said.
Yes, there's definitely a few older uncles or aunts and things that maybe need to hear that message loud and clear, because I've seen it being asked to people at weddings, like, oh, what's next? I'm just like, shush. So yeah, no, people don't understand. And I see the same thing even happening with someone who already has a child or two children, you know, because they might be trying and have suffered miscarriages. Nobody knows. So I always say, yeah, you don't know what anyone is going through in life. And from the outside, and going back to the comparison thing, you might think everything looks perfect, but you truly don't know what they've gone through. And I've seen it firsthand. So I think the moral of the tale really, isn't it, is about understanding and compassion, both for yourself as well as for others, and realizing, you know, everyone's in the same boat. We're all just trying to get through things as best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more that we talk about that and kind of, I suppose, change the narrative, we have less shame. There's more vulnerability. People can help each other through that as well. But thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation so much. There's nothing more that I love speaking to a woman who is challenging the status quo and just really helping empower women with the information to help themselves move forward and not feel so stuck and lost and helpless. But can you tell everyone where we can find you?
Absolutely, yeah. You'll find me at the Fertility Detective on Instagram. I'm there a lot. And obviously you can check out any of the programs that I'm running, such as the Fertility Reset 2.0, which is very much for those who are kind of just trying to decide on their next steps and wondering if IVF is actually right for them, or planning another cycle. That's a good program for that. And then my Making Sense of Miscarriage program, which is really high level support for those who are suffering pregnancy loss or unexplained recurrent implantation failure.
Amazing. Such amazing programs to have. And it's just brilliant that we have that now. And there's so much more research and so many more women specializing in this, and possibly men as well. I just haven't found any. But yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. Go give Jessica some love. If you found this conversation helpful, please leave a review, share it with a friend, family member, etc., and get this information out there as well. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Orla. It was a pleasure. Thank you.